He shouldn't have lived. Not after being abandoned to die, treated like a hunted beast and left dangling from the jagged cliffs of Redthorn Canyon. Not after the radios went dead, the orders evaporated, and the promised reinforcements never showed. But somehow, he endured. Because 3 German shepherds, bred to obey, not to think, decided that day they would become more than what they were trained to be. They became guardians, avengers, angels wrapped in fur. What those dogs did rewrote everything the Marines thought they knew about loyalty and instinct. Before the story begins, tell me, where in the world are you watching from? And if you believe that dogs are one of God's greatest gifts to humankind, type Amen in the comments and hit subscribe, because what happens next will stay with you long after the screen fades to black. The heat rippled across the desert like breath from an ancient dragon. It was late morning in Red Mesa, New Mexico, and the sandstone cliffs glowed under a merciless sun that seemed to melt the very horizon. The jagged spines of Redthorn Canyon sliced through the sky, their shadows falling over cracked scrub and ghostly riverbeds that hadn't held water in 100 years. The air tasted of iron, dust, and the faint scent of something old, something forgotten. Gunnery Sergeant Eli Morgan adjusted the worn handlebar of his Desert Patrol ATV, its faded paint scarred by years of sun and grit. At 42, he was lean not from vanity but from survival, his skin bronzed and toughened by years in unforgiving heat. Streaks of gray threaded through his close-cut black hair and beard. His eyes, gray-green and glassy, like stone polished smooth by wind, said more than words ever could. Eli was not a man of speeches or noise. His strength was measured, quiet, and shaped by decades of service, much of it spent in places that no longer existed on maps. The loss of his recon unit in Sanjin had left a hollow place behind his eyes, a silence he never spoke of again. 3 shadows followed close behind him, pacing in tight formation. Ranger, the eldest, was a solid black German shepherd built like a tank, broad in the chest and over 6 years old. He moved with the discipline of a veteran, every step measured, every glance precise. A torn scar along his right ear twitched at every sound, a reminder of the IED blast that had ended his active duty in Afghanistan. He had refused every new handler since, until Eli. Somehow, the two had recognized the same wounds in each other. Echo came next, sleek, brown, with a white splash across her chest and eyes always in motion. She was the thinker of the trio, quick, observant, and calculating. Only 4 years old, she had washed out of formal K9 service for being too reactive. But Sergeant Miranda Rios, who oversaw the Red Mesa Canine program, had argued otherwise. Echo didn't lack obedience, she lacked trust. And then there was Valor, the youngest at 3, sable-coated, large-pawed, and endlessly curious. He was still learning, still reckless, but when danger struck, his focus was pure fire. Not refined, but fearless. The 3 had been assigned to Eli under an experimental program, a test to see if a multi-K9 recon team could replace manned patrols in terrain too dangerous for human squads. So far, the program had succeeded beyond expectation. Some said too much. Eli didn't mind. He preferred dogs these days. They didn't lie. They didn't betray. At 7:34 a.m. Eli stood in front of the cracked glass window of the Red Mesa Desert Command, a low, sun-faded building that had once been a ranger outpost. Captain Roy Tagert, a tall man in his late 40s with prematurely white hair and a posture so stiff it seemed rehearsed, handed him a folded topographic map and an outdated GPS tracker. "This route's been adjusted," Tagert said, tapping a red ink line near the center. "Redthorn Canyon. Got reports of movement, maybe smugglers, maybe nothing. You'll be on your own for this run. Take the dogs. Radio in if things get interesting." Eli's eyes narrowed as he studied the map. "This trail cuts through the ravine." "Exactly," Tagert said, already turning back to his computer. "We need eyes where no one's been. You've got 6 hours before the heat turns you into leather. Move fast." Eli nodded but didn't answer. He didn't trust Tagert, never had. Something about the man's tone was always just a little too smooth, a little too polished. Even the map looked wrong, ridge lines off-center, contour marks misplaced, but he said nothing. Not yet. By 8:02, Eli's ATV rattled down the trail, the dogs flanking him in perfect rhythm as the morning sun began its cruel ascent. Dust kicked up in golden plumes behind them, and the horizon rippled with mirage heat. Echo's nose lifted into the air, catching a scent. Ranger growled, low, deliberate. Valor trotted ahead, tail high, tongue lolling. The desert seemed endless. At 9:17, they reached the mouth of Redthorn Canyon. The terrain changed abruptly, narrower, unstable, the ground breaking into shale and steep drop-offs. Sound echoed strangely here, bouncing between the jagged walls. Eli dismounted and pushed the ATV behind a cluster of rock. The dogs fanned out, silent, alert. The air was too still. "See something?" Eli murmured. Ranger froze, ears pricked. Echo darted to the right and sniffed along the edge of a ledge. She barked once, not panic, just signal. Alert. Eli moved closer, every step crunching gravel beneath his boots. That's when he heard it, the faintest rustle behind him. A whisper of motion. A shadow where no shadow belonged. Then came the blow. Metallic. Sharp. The world exploded into white noise. He fell hard, the sky spinning, Ranger lunging towards something unseen, then the crack of a net, the violent yelp of a dog, the sound of a body hitting stone. Echo howled. Valor barked until the canyon swallowed his voice. Then, silence. When Eli came to, his first thought was that the world had flipped upside down. Then the pain arrived, sharp, white-hot, pulsing through every nerve. His arms were twisted behind his back, wrists cutting against plastic zip ties that had already sliced into skin. A thick rope looped around his waist, biting into his ribs and abdomen. It took him a moment to realize the stone beneath him wasn't beneath him at all. He was hanging. Suspended 30 feet above the canyon floor, his body swung slightly in the dry wind, tethered by a single rope anchor to a jagged outcrop of sandstone. The world below shimmered and swayed, a sea of red rock and shadows. No movement. No sound. No dogs. No radio. Every breath seared his lungs. The sun baked down on his neck, turning his skin to fire. His shoulder screamed where the blow had landed. He twisted, but the motion only made the rope creak and grind against the sharp lip of stone above. Whoever had done this wanted him to die slow. No gunfire. No looters. No demands. Just silence. It wasn't an ambush, it was an execution. A setup planned with military precision. Someone had known his route. Someone had sent him here. Ranger. Echo. Valor. Where were they? Eli's jaw locked tight. Sweat burned his eyes. He glanced upward. The rope frayed slightly where it met the rock, each strand straining, fibers snapping one by one. One good gust, one twitch too many, and gravity would finish what his attackers had started. The desert around him was mercilessly still. Time stretched, heat thickened, the world blurred into a red haze. Then, far away, movement. Tiny, fast. 3 shapes cutting through the horizon in separate directions, a black blur, a brown streak, and a sable silhouette. The dogs were alive. Scattered, yes. But alive. The sun climbed mercilessly higher, hammering the canyon with heat that shimmered like ghosts. The sandstone itself seemed to breathe. Every shadow was a blade. Eli hung motionless, his body an ache wrapped in sunburn and bruises. The world had shrunk to a single moment, the sound of his own heartbeat and the groan of rope under strain. His lips were cracked, his throat sandpaper. The silence pressed on his ears until it roared. Memories bled into the heat, the ambush in San Jin, the convoy burning, his brothers' names echoing inside his skull. Redmond. Choi. Vasquez. Ghosts of his past bleeding into the present. I should have gone with them, he muttered, voice dry and broken. But he hadn't. And now here he was again, betrayed, left behind, waiting for the desert to claim him. Above him, the rope groaned again, a deadly warning. The strands were giving way. The sandstone it looped over had started to shear through the fibers like a saw. The next gust could be the last. He tried to brace his boots against the rock face, but there was nothing, just empty air beneath him. The world spun. His head throbbed. The light dimmed at the edges of his vision. Maybe death wouldn't be the worst thing now. Maybe it would be mercy. Then, a sound. Faint. Small. Real. The tumble of a pebble. The scrape of paws. Eli's eyelids fluttered open. A shadow appeared above him, sleek, sharp-eared, familiar. Echo. She stood at the canyon's rim, her dark coat glowing like bronze beneath the punishing sun. Her ears were rigid, her eyes locked on him. She growled once, low and deep, a sound that sliced through the wind. Then she barked, one clear, sharp note that echoed down the cliff. He couldn't answer, but something flickered in him, not hope exactly, but instinct. Survival. Echo sniffed around the rope's anchor point, circling with surgical precision. Her nose pressed into the dust, analyzing every scent. She barked again, twice this time, and then bolted back into the rocks. Eli strained to listen. The sound of gravel shifting. A second set of paws. Then another. Ranger. Valor. They were coming. A mile northeast, two shepherds sprinted through the canyon's flat, scorched valley. Ranger led the way, his gait steady, mechanical, his nose locked onto a scent trail of oil and blood. Valor followed close behind, panting hard, dust caking his coat. He was exhausted but determined. Ranger didn't pause. Every step was a mission. Find. Recover. Protect. Echo's distant bark echoed across the canyons, faint but clear. Ranger stopped mid-stride. His ears twitched once, twice, and without hesitation, he turned and altered course. Valor hesitated only a heartbeat before following. By the time they reached the canyon's edge, Echo had already found the anchor point. She paced around it, nostrils flaring. The rope smelled of Eli, sweat, blood, fear, and something else. Gun oil. Plastic. Zip ties. She barked again, sharp and precise. Moments later, Ranger appeared, silent as shadow. He scanned the scene once and understood. His tail dropped low. He circled twice, then sat before the anchor and lifted his head. The howl that came next rolled through the canyon like thunder, deep, mournful, commanding. A soldier's call to his fallen brother. Below, Eli stirred. The sound pierced through the haze in his mind. He knew that voice. It had meant rescue once before. Could it again? His eyes fluttered open, his body barely holding on. The sun blurred, and then, movement above. Valor. The young shepherd appeared at the rim, panting hard, his ears tilted forward in confusion. Echo snapped once to focus him. Ranger growled, an order, not a warning. And together, the three dogs stood above the canyon, gazing down at the man who had been their leader, their human, their pack. They didn't understand the words, impossible. They only knew ours. Far across the desert ridge, a young woman adjusted her binoculars. Private Delaney Pierce, 24, newly transferred from Colorado, wasn't supposed to be out this far. She was slender, freckled, her cheeks sunburned under a loose patrol cap. That morning, she'd been assigned to inventory drone kits, busy work for a rookie. But something had gnawed at her gut ever since Sergeant Morgan's signal went silent. When the dogs failed to return, she borrowed a jeep and drove out. Now, as she scanned the canyon through heat shimmer, her breath caught. 3 station K9s, all gathered at the same ridge, staring down. That wasn't random. That was purpose. She grabbed the radio. "Command, this is Pierce. You're going to want to see this." Back on the cliff, Echo moved closer to the rope, sniffed once more, and looked at Ranger. He barked twice, and the team went to work, searching for leverage, testing angles, calculating their next move without a single human word between them. Below, Eli's breathing grew shallow. His vision swam in and out of focus. But he could see them, 3 silhouettes against the blinding sky. His dogs. His family. They hadn't left him. Even as the rope strained and fibers began to tear, he whispered through cracked lips. "You found me." And the desert wind carried the sound upward, into the ears of the 3 who had come to save him. The sun hovered like molten copper over Redthorn Canyon, baking every surface until the air itself shimmered. High above the red rock abyss, 3 German shepherds faced the impossible. Below them, Gunnery Sergeant Eli Morgan hung like a broken pendulum, bloodied, half-conscious, the rope that held him unraveling fiber by fiber. Ranger moved first. The old soldier in him never waited for orders. He studied the rope's anchor point, sniffing the dust and stone. Years of combat training whispered through his instincts: test, brace, pull. He barked once, deep and short, the kind of sound that made others act. Echo responded immediately, circling the outcrop. Her sharp eyes darted between Ranger and the taut line. She sniffed the groove where the rope bit into rock, mapping every detail. When she found the weak point, she barked twice, quick, urgent. Valor, restless and eager, pranced behind them, unsure where to focus his energy. He barked toward the canyon, then at the rope, then back at Ranger. Echo nudged him with her nose, a silent command. "Here. Help." Ranger planted his paws and leaned his full weight backward, muscles rippling beneath his dark coat. Echo mirrored him on the other side, teeth clamping the rope to steady its sway. Valor crouched low, testing the line with his jaws before biting down hard. The rope trembled under his pull. Eli jerked upward an inch, groaning as pain exploded through his ribs. His eyes cracked open. For a heartbeat, he saw nothing but blinding light. Then, 3 shapes above him, straining, pulling, refusing to quit. "God, you're really doing it," he rasped, the words barely air. Ranger growled and heaved again. The line tightened. Echo adjusted her stance, anchoring her paws in a groove. Valor pulled with every ounce of his young strength, his teeth grinding against coarse fibers that tasted of dust and blood. The canyon filled with the sound of effort, panting, scraping, low growls, the language of survival. Inch by inch, Eli's body shifted upward. His boots scraped the cliffside, sending tiny avalanches of gravel cascading into the void. Another pull. Another inch. Then another. At the top, Echo repositioned, seizing the rope closer to the anchor. Valor strained, trembling. Ranger's shoulders quivered from the effort, but he didn't stop. Finally, with a last coordinated surge, a miracle of instinct and unity, Eli's chest reached the lip of the cliff. His torso flopped over the edge, limbs limp. Ranger barked sharply, a command to hold. Echo released the rope and seized Eli's torn sleeve, tugging sideways. Valor nudged from below, his muzzle pushing against Eli's ribs until the Marine rolled fully onto solid ground. Eli lay motionless, cheek pressed to the scorching stone. The heat steamed through his torn uniform. His breath rattled. He didn't know if he was crying, bleeding, or both. Then something warm touched his face, a wet nose, then another. A weight settled against his chest, heartbeat to heartbeat. "You're real," he whispered, voice trembling. The 3 dogs lay beside him, panting, trembling, guarding. Eli's eyes drifted skyward. You're the real heroes. Then the world went dark again. When the desert finally surrendered to dusk, its fury faded to silence. The sky bruised into purple, the temperature dropped, and the canyon breathed again. Eli stumbled through the darkness, his steps uneven, every breath a knife in his ribs. Blood crusted along his temple, his tongue swollen from thirst. He was alive, barely, but he wasn't walking alone. Echo led the way, nose to the ground, scanning constantly. Her fur, streaked with dust, glowed silver under the rising moon. Ranger followed behind, steady and deliberate, occasionally pausing to tear another strip from Eli's torn shirt and drop it along the trail, instinctively leaving a breadcrumb path home. Valor trotted beside Eli, wearing the tactical backpack that had once hung on the ATV. Somehow, with Echo's help, he had wriggled into the straps earlier. Inside were water pouches and a few emergency tools. The young dog carried it with the pride of a soldier. Eli staggered, dropped to one knee, groaned. "Don't stop," he muttered, uncertain if he was speaking to himself or the dogs. Valor barked softly, pressing his flank against Eli's leg, lending his weight. Eli leaned into him, hand buried in thick fur. The warmth anchored him, reminding him that he wasn't alone. His mind flickered between past and present. 10 years earlier, another desert, another mission gone wrong. Wardak Province, Afghanistan. His unit ambushed. Radios jammed. Half his men dead within minutes. And the one who had saved him wasn't human. Bullet. A massive sable shepherd with a torn ear and nerves of steel. Bullet had dragged Eli out from a blast zone when no man could move. They'd survived 4 miles through enemy terrain before rescue. Eli never talked about it. Some stories lived better in silence. But tonight, as he watched Echo scout ahead and Ranger mark the path behind, he felt that same presence again, loyalty without question, courage without reason. They walked through the night, guided by instinct. The moon climbed higher, casting pale light over the desert. Echo scouted ahead. Valor circled back again and again, checking Eli's pace. Ranger kept to the rear, eyes scanning for pursuit. At one point, Echo froze, body rigid. A rattlesnake coiled on the path. No bark, no panic. She simply turned, signaling the others with a flick of her tail. They detoured west in silence. Eli never even saw the danger. Hours passed. The terrain softened. Tire tracks appeared half buried in the sand, then a rusted mile marker, then the faint hum of distant power lines. Civilization. Back at Red Mesa Station, the night shift had fallen quiet. Most of the base was asleep or out on late patrols. Only one person remained in the comms room, Carly Draper. Carly was in her early 40s, hair streaked silver, eyes sharp from decades staring at radar screens. A former sheriff's dispatcher, she had a voice that could cut through chaos and a desk drawer full of herbal tea she swore worked better than sedatives. She looked up from a crossword puzzle when the motion alarm blinked. "Thermal movement, southeast ridge," she murmured. Her fingers danced across the keys. An image flickered to life, 3 K9 heat signatures and 1 human, faint and staggering. Carly's eyes widened. Sweet mother. She snatched the comm headset. "Sergeant Rios, get to the screen. You'll want to see this." Minutes later, Sergeant Miranda Rios entered, still in fatigues, eyes shadowed with worry. She stared at the display. "That's Eli," she said quietly. Carly frowned. "How can you tell?" Miranda leaned closer, tracing the blurry shapes. "That's Ranger's gait. Back leg drags half an inch. Echoes ahead, always scouts first. That's them." She turned sharply. "Prep medical. He's coming home." Back in the desert, the lights of Red Mesa shimmered faintly against the horizon, ghostly, distant. Eli saw them and wasn't sure if they were real. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. The dogs knew. Echo pressed forward, quickening her pace. Ranger matched her stride, limping but steady. Valor nudged Eli's hand, and the Marine's fingers curled instinctively around the young dog's fur. Step by step, they walked toward the glow, toward safety, toward home. The sterile scent of antiseptic filled the medical bay at Red Mesa Station, a jarring contrast to the sun-baked silence outside. The hum of fluorescent lights vibrated faintly above, flickering in the corners like restless ghosts. Eli Morgan lay propped on a narrow cot, an 4-line running into his arm. His uniform had been cut away, revealing bruises that painted his ribs in shades of violet and dust brown. He blinked slowly, his gray-green eyes heavy but alert, scanning every shadow as if expecting another ambush. Curled on the floor beside the bed was Ranger, half beneath the frame, his chest rising and falling in a slow, steady rhythm. His once jet-black coat now carried streaks of gray along the muzzle, his right ear twitching at every sound. He hadn't moved from Eli's side since they returned. Across the room stood Sergeant Miranda Rios, tall, broad-shouldered, her posture iron-straight despite the exhaustion in her eyes. Her dark hair was braided tight, and a scar traced from her temple down to her jawline, an old memory from Ramadi that she never spoke about. She wasn't a woman who wasted words, or trust. "You're lucky," she said, her voice low but edged with relief. "Another hour out there and you'd have been jerky for the coyotes." Eli gave a small nod, lifting the damp compress from his forehead. "Wouldn't have been the worst way to go." Miranda didn't smile. She crossed her arms, leaning against the metal cabinet. "You want to tell me what the hell happened out there?" He took a breath, slow and painful, then reached for his torn uniform folded on the table beside him. From its inner pocket, he pulled out a crumpled, dirt-stained field map. The edges were creased and sun-bleached, the ink smeared. "I followed the patrol route they gave me," he said quietly. "Tagert handed me this himself." Miranda took the map and unfolded it under the lamp. Her eyes narrowed. "This sector," Eli pointed with a shaking finger, "it's not on the standard recon grid. I figured maybe we were testing a new corridor, but that cliff, it's nowhere on any previous draft." Miranda studied the layout in silence. Something about it didn't fit. The topographic lines were mislabeled. The ridge markers didn't match any official satellite data. Then she noticed the signature at the bottom. Captain Roy Tagert. Only, it wasn't. "The R in his name, he always loops it upward," she muttered. "Whoever drew this didn't know that. This isn't Tagert's hand." Eli frowned, the fatigue giving way to something harder, focus. "Forged?" "Completely," Miranda said flatly. "And whoever did this had access to restricted coordinates." Ranger lifted his head and whined softly, sensing the tension. Miranda glanced at him, then turned back to her console. "I'm pulling the dispatch logs for the last 72 hours, she said, fingers flying across the keys. "If this was a reroute, it'll show somewhere in the system." Outside the window, the desert wind picked up, whistling through the brittle Joshua trees lining the lot. The horizon glowed with the faint pulse of heat lightning, a storm brewing in the distance. Eli leaned forward slightly, his ribs protesting. "I trust you, Miranda," he said quietly. "But something's rotten here." She didn't look up. "You're not wrong." Elsewhere on base, Echo and Valor rested in the kennel, a chain-link enclosure near the supply shed, shaded but open to the night. Echo paced in tight circles, restless, scanning every sound that drifted through the dark. Valor lay curled near the fence, eyes half shut but ears alert. Every time a footstep echoed, his head lifted, hopeful. An hour passed. Then another. Back in the command center, Carly Draper sat at her console, sipping her fourth cup of cinnamon tea. When Miranda's voice came through the intercom, she didn't even flinch. "Carly," Miranda said, her tone razor-sharp, "secure all external data ports and isolate the main server. Offline only. Then run a deep scrub for wiped files. Something's missing." "Copy that," Carly replied, already typing. And for the record, I always said something smelled fishy about that man. Later that night, the station had quieted. The hum of the air vents blended with the faint ticking of the wall clock. In the medical bay, Eli sat awake under dim light, Ranger still beside him. The dog's ears twitched. Footsteps. Slow. Heavy. Deliberate. Not routine. Not familiar. Eli reached beneath the cot and pulled a small utility knife from its sheath, a habit from too many battlefields. The door creaked. Miranda stepped in, her face pale under the flickering hall light. She shut the door behind her. The logs are gone, she said. Eli's eyes hardened. Gone. Completely wiped. Yesterday's patrol records, personnel lists, dispatch times, all erased. Whoever did it knew exactly what to scrub and how to cover their tracks. Fast. She sank onto the edge of the cot, elbows on her knees, her voice tight with fury. I found something else. A secondary directive buried under the shift sheet. No signature. Just coordinates. And your call sign. Eli's pulse quickened. Tagert. I can't prove it, Miranda replied. But I'd bet my badge on it. Somebody wanted you out there alone, Eli. Somebody wanted you dead. The silence that followed was thick as concrete. Even Ranger didn't move. Eli spoke first. You think this was a hit? Miranda shook her head slowly. Not a hit. A cleanup. Eli turned toward the backpack Valor had carried back from the canyon. He dragged it close, rummaging through the side pocket until his hand closed around something small and cold, a flash drive. He held it up. This wasn't mine. Miranda took it, frowning. Where did it come from? I found it stuffed in the bag when I checked the gear, Eli said. Either someone wanted it hidden, or someone wanted it found. Miranda's expression darkened. I'll run it offline. If it's bait, we'll find out before they do. The wind outside howled against the walls. Somewhere in the distance, thunder rolled. That night, Red Mesa slept under an uneasy stillness, no drills, no patrols, just the low hum of suspicion crawling through the halls. Ranger lifted his head once more, eyes fixed on the door. Something unseen moved beyond the light, quiet, patient, watching. The desert was holding its breath. And the storm was coming. The desert night was unnervingly still. No hum of machinery, no static chatter from radios, just the quiet breathing of Red Mesa Station asleep under a bruised sky. Then, all at once, everything changed. The overhead lights flickered once, twice, then died. The familiar hum of power vanished, replaced by a low, hollow buzz that faded into darkness. Even the backup generator failed to start. Inside the command center, Sergeant Miranda Rios rose from her desk instantly, her instincts kicking in before thought could form. Carly, she called down the hall. From the comms room came the reply, sharp and strained. I'm blind in here. All systems are dead, not a power surge, not a short. This looks deliberate. Miranda's eyes narrowed. Secure the drive. Now. But before the command could finish, the sound hit, a crash of metal, followed by the muffled bark of suppressed gunfire. Then boots. Heavy. Purposeful. The base was under attack. In the medical wing, Eli had been half awake, his ribs aching, his mind replaying the canyon. When the lights failed, instinct took over. The darkness was total, thick and immediate. Ranger shot upright with a low growl. Echo and Valor, resting nearby, rose simultaneously, bodies tense, ears flicking toward the door. Then came the footsteps. Fast. Heavy. Closing in. Eli gritted his teeth and pushed off the cot, ignoring the pain that tore through his side. His hand reached beneath the bed frame and found what he always kept there, a small utility knife. Not much, but something. The door exploded inward. The first man through wore tactical black, no insignia, no lights, face covered. His weapon came up, but he didn't get the chance to fire. Echo lunged, a blur of muscle and fury. Her teeth sank deep into his arm, the impact forcing him to drop his rifle. He shouted, stumbling backward as Ranger darted to Eli's side, placing himself between his handler and the intruders. Valor, the youngest, was already moving. His growl rolled like thunder as he barreled toward the second figure entering behind the first. The intruder tried to raise a sidearm, but Valor hit him full force at the knees. Both went down hard. The room erupted into chaos, gunmetal flashes, barking, shouting, the metallic clang of boots on tile. What the attackers hadn't expected wasn't resistance, it was coordination. These weren't pets. These were soldiers. Echo released her target, pivoting instantly, flanking his retreat. Ranger stood firm, guarding Eli as the Marine limped toward the nearest overturned table for cover. Valor circled, snapping, keeping the second assailant pinned against the wall. The first man tried to crawl toward the fallen rifle, clutching his bleeding arm. Before he could reach it, Echo was on him again, teeth clamping down on his sleeve and dragging him away. From the hallway came another burst of gunfire, sharp, precise. Miranda. She had managed to reach the armory before the power cut sealed the inner doors. Now she crouched low, Glock raised, eyes adjusting to the dim light from emergency strips flickering along the walls. Two shadows moved ahead, armed, unfamiliar. The first turned the corner with an AR-style rifle, sweeping the corridor. The second carried a crowbar, moving fast and clumsy. They didn't know the layout. That gave Miranda the advantage. She waited, counted the steps, then moved. Her first shot hit the rifleman low, in the leg. He went down screaming, the weapon clattering across the floor. The second spun toward the sound, crowbar raised, but before he could close the gap, a black shape slammed into him from behind. Ranger. He hit like a sledgehammer, teeth sinking deep. The man went down, the crowbar clanging against the wall. Ranger. Miranda gasped, lowering her weapon. What the hell? Her words died in her throat as the wounded gunman, still conscious, raised his weapon shakily from the floor. Miranda turned, but she was half a second too slow. The gunshot cracked through the corridor, deafening in the narrow space. But the bullet didn't hit her. Ranger leapt in front of her, the impact hitting his chest with a sickening thud. The sound echoed, sharp and final. No. Miranda dropped to her knees, hands already pressing against the wound. Blood spread fast, dark and hot against the tile. Ranger's breathing came shallow, his eyes fluttering but never leaving hers. Eli arrived seconds later, limping, one arm wrapped in makeshift bandages, the other holding the rifle he'd taken from one of the downed intruders. He froze at the sight, Miranda cradling Ranger, blood pooling at her knees. "Stay with us, boy," Eli whispered, voice breaking. "Just stay with us." Ranger's paw twitched weakly against his arm. But there was no time to stop. Echo barked sharply, once, twice. Headlights flared outside the corridor windows. Someone was trying to flee. In the back lot, an ATV roared to life. Its tires spun in the sand, headlights cutting through the darkness. The driver, tall, broad, moving with frantic purpose, wore a Red Mesa patrol jacket. Eli pushed through the rear exit, rifle in hand, dogs flanking him despite their exhaustion. The night wind stung his skin as he limped into the open. Out of the vehicle, he shouted. The driver froze. The headlights painted his face pale and ghostly. Captain Roy Tagert. He didn't reach for a weapon. Didn't even flinch. Just stared, jaw tight, eyes hollow. "Didn't think you'd crawl out of that canyon," he said, voice flat. "Your mistake," Eli replied. "Out. Now." Tagert stepped down slowly, his boots crunching in the gravel. You don't understand. Save it for Miranda. Echo circled to block his flank, teeth bared. Valor growled low, head lowered, eyes burning like coals. Eli moved in close, zip ties in hand. You're done, Captain. The confrontation ended without another word. By the time they dragged him back inside, the station smelled of gunpowder and smoke. Ranger was barely breathing. Carly Draper knelt beside Miranda in the medbay, hands moving quickly to pack the wound. We lost power, Carly muttered through gritted teeth, but not faith. Miranda's hands shook as she worked, not from fear, from fury. Stay, old boy, she whispered, voice cracking. Stay with me. Eli stood in the doorway, blood drying on his knuckles, uniform torn, chest rising and falling with exhaustion and disbelief. His eyes met Miranda's. This was never about a patrol, he said. They wanted the station compromised. Miranda nodded grimly, pressing harder against Ranger's wound. And we're going to find out why. Outside, the emergency generator coughed to life at last, flooding the hall with amber light. But inside, one light, one heartbeat, was flickering, fighting to stay lit. And every soul at Red Mesa knew they would fight with it. Dawn had not yet broken, and the sky above Red Mesa was a bruised gray, streaked with the faintest hint of lavender. The air still smelled of smoke and copper, the echoes of gunfire clung to the walls long after the shooting stopped. Inside the dim infirmary, the scene was silent except for the hiss of oxygen and the ragged, shallow breaths of one wounded hero. Ranger lay on a makeshift operating table, his chest rising in quick, uneven gasps. The bullet had entered just below his shoulder, tearing through muscle before lodging near his lung. His black fur was matted crimson, his heat radiating against the chilled metal beneath him. Eli knelt at his side, both hands resting gently on one paw. His eyes were bloodshot, rimmed red, his voice roughened to a whisper. He never even blinked, Eli said quietly. Not when the gun went off. He didn't even flinch. Across the room, Carly Draper moved like a surgeon born of chaos, sleeves rolled up, eyes hard, fingers stained red from makeshift bandaging. The usual calm humor in her voice was gone. We need the vet here, now, she muttered, scanning the half-stocked cabinets for anything sterilized. In the doorway stood Sergeant Miranda Rios, phone pressed to her ear, fatigue smudging her eyes. Central Dispatch, patch me through to Flagstaff immediately, she barked. Priority 1 airlift, I need Dr. Genevieve Hart rerouted to Red Mesa. Yes, Animal Trauma Center. K9 officer down. I don't care what it takes, fly her here. She ended the call and turned back to Carly. ETA. 20 minutes if the chopper doesn't get lost in the dust, Carly replied. Miranda moved to the table, voice lowering. Hang on, boy. We're not done yet. The helicopter arrived in a storm of dust and grit, cutting through the pre-dawn air like a wounded hawk. Out stepped Dr. Genevieve Hart, wiry, mid-50s, sharp as a scalpel. She was still half-dressed from sleep, pajama bottoms visible beneath her scrubs, her gray hair twisted into a loose braid. Without hesitation, she dropped her bag and took position at Ranger's side. Her eyes swept over the wound once. Thoracotomy, she said briskly. If we wait to transfer him, he won't make it. Miranda blinked. Here. In this room. I've done worse in barns, Hart replied. Then, glancing at Eli, you his handler? Not exactly, he rasped. Doesn't matter. He knows your voice. Keep talking. The next 30 minutes were a blur of motion. Hart's small team, 2 volunteers from town, worked in absolute focus. Noah Keller, a retired Navy medic with a limp and steady hands, moved like he was back on deployment. Beside him, Kelsey Raymond, a tattoo-sleeved army mechanic who loved dogs more than people, handed instruments and clamped lines without needing direction. Eli stayed by Ranger's head, murmuring softly, voice shaking but constant. You're not done, soldier. You've still got work to do. You hear me? Ranger's paw twitched. Echo and Valor sat close to the doorway, silent sentinels. Echo's ears flicked every time a tool clinked, Valor's tail tapped faintly against the floor, rhythmic, hopeful. Sweat beaded down Dr. Hart's temple as she worked. The bullet came free with a soft metallic clink against the tray. Got it, she whispered. Tears bad but fixable. Outside, the first thin rays of sunrise bled across the desert, painting the sky gold and rose. Inside, the world held its breath. BP holding, Noah said. RESP steadying. Hart leaned back, wiped her forehead. He's not out of danger, she said, voice hoarse. But he's not dying either. That's a win. Eli exhaled, eyes closing as if the weight of the canyon finally lifted from his shoulders. He made it through, he whispered. Dr. Hart gave a faint smile. He's got weeks of recovery ahead. You up for it? Eli looked at Ranger's still trembling chest. I owe him that much, he said softly. I owe all of them. In the command center, Miranda and Carly had already begun the next battle, data. The backup generator hummed weakly, powering only one workstation. Miranda uploaded every fragment they'd salvaged, maps, intercepted messages, audio logs. A photo of Captain Roy Tagert, wrists zip-tied, accompanied the report. Send and confirm, she said. 82% uploaded, Carly replied, tapping the keyboard with mechanical precision. 5 more minutes. Miranda watched the screen, exhaustion hidden behind fury. Tagert's not talking. Carly shook her head. Not a word. Just that smirk. This wasn't about data, Miranda said quietly. This was about silencing Eli. Making sure no one believed him. Carly paused. Why go to all that trouble? Miranda didn't answer. Her eyes drifted toward the rising light outside the window. Because he survived something he wasn't supposed to, twice. Back in the infirmary, the air was heavy but calm. The surgery was over. Hart's team cleaned the instruments in silence while the dogs watched every move. Ranger's breathing, though shallow, was steady now. Echo crept closer and rested her head against his flank. Valor nudged Eli's hand gently, as if to remind him, we're still here. Eli looked down at them all, 3 soldiers without words, yet more faithful than any he'd ever served beside. Back in the infirmary, the air was heavy but calm. The surgery was over. Hart's team cleaned the instruments in silence while the dogs watched every move. Ranger's breathing, though shallow, was steady now. Echo crept closer and rested her head against his flank. Valor nudged Eli's hand gently, as if to remind him, we're still here. Eli looked down at them all, 3 soldiers without words, yet more faithful than any he'd ever served beside. For the first time in years, the Marine's shoulders dropped, the weight of war and guilt slipping free. His breath shuddered out, not in pain this time, but gratitude. Outside, dawn spilled over the cliffs of Red Mesa, turning the desert gold. The land that had nearly killed them now glowed like forgiveness itself. And inside that small station, surrounded by silence and loyal hearts that refused to quit, Eli Morgan finally allowed himself to believe in miracles again. The sun climbed slowly over the cliffs of Red Mesa, spreading light like liquid gold across the scarred desert. The air still smelled faintly of gunpowder and antiseptic, but for the first time in days, there was peace. Outside the command station, the wind whispered softly through the brush, carrying with it the promise of renewal. Gunnery Sergeant Eli Morgan stood on the observation ridge behind the base, hands braced on his hips, his tan shirt tugged by the morning breeze. Below, the red horizon shimmered under the new light, the same horizon that had almost swallowed him whole. For once, it felt like the world wasn't trying to take something from him. The door creaked open behind him. Sergeant Miranda Rios stepped out, squinting into the sun, arms crossed over her chest. Her auburn hair was still damp from a quick rinse, her boots dust-streaked. She looked as though she hadn't slept, but there was a rare softness in her face. "You're really turning down the desk job?" she asked. Eli didn't turn around. "They want me behind a computer. Air conditioning. Paperwork. You know how long it's been since I trusted four walls?" Miranda smirked faintly. "Since Afghanistan?" He nodded. "Most people," she continued, stepping up beside him, "go through what you did and look for safety." Eli finally looked at her. His eyes, weathered gray and steel blue, reflected the morning light. "That's the problem with safety," he said quietly. "It makes you forget why you fought in the first place." From below, the faint scrape of paws echoed. Ranger was walking again, slower, steadier, a wide bandage wrapped across his chest. Each step was deliberate, proud. Around his neck hung a new black leather collar with a silver tag shaped like the ridgeline of Red Mesa. Miranda's idea. The small sunrise ceremony had been simple. No speeches. No medals. Just silence, respect, and a few hands raised in salute to the dog that had thrown himself into a bullet's path. Echo followed close behind, her stride smooth and alert, always scanning, always leading. Valor brought up the rear, his energy tempered but his spirit unbroken. The three moved together like a formation reborn. Miranda nodded toward them. "They know." Eli smiled faintly. "They always did." He knelt, running a hand gently behind Ranger's ear. "Even when I didn't." He reached into his pocket and unfolded a crisp document, edges still warm from the printer. Across the top were typed words that caught the sunlight. "Proposal, Echo K9 Recon Unit." Miranda raised an eyebrow. "What's this?" "Hybrid teams," Eli said. "Humans and shepherds. Field trained together for recon, rescue, and recovery. No more leaving anyone behind, not man, not dog. We train them out here, where instinct still matters." Miranda flipped through the pages. It wasn't just a concept, it was a blueprint. Equipment lists, training modules, field rotation schedules, even a sketched logo in the corner, a shepherd's head facing the horizon, the words "Echo Unit," eyes on the horizon arched above it. "You wrote this last night?" she asked. Eli gave a small shrug. "Felt like something worth staying up for." For the first time in weeks, Miranda smiled, a real one. "Command will need a face to pitch this," she said, glancing pointedly at his dirt-streaked shirt. "Preferably one not covered in dog hair." Eli chuckled. "That's what uniforms are for." Later that afternoon, Carly Draper helped Ranger outside for his daily walk. The sun was warm but forgiving, and the desert wind carried the faint smell of sage. "Come on, old man," Carly murmured, adjusting the sling beneath his belly. Ranger grumbled softly but moved forward anyway, his pride refusing to let the pain win. Watching from the fence was Lucas Bentley, a new recruit fresh from the Mojave sector, mid-20s, lean, olive-skinned, with a mop of dark curls barely contained under his cap. He grinned as Ranger limped past. "What's his name again?" Lucas asked. "Ranger," Carly replied, smirking. "Don't stare too long. He'll take it as a challenge." Lucas chuckled. "Noted. He's impressive." Carly's gaze softened. "He's the reason Eli's alive." By evening, the desert had cooled to a wash of copper and navy. The station hummed again, but this time with calm purpose, not chaos. Tagert had been transferred under armed escort to federal custody. Headquarters ordered Red Mesa to remain active, now designated as a tactical field and K9 training outpost. In the lot, a newly modified Jeep waited, packed and ready. The rear seats had been replaced with a custom mesh kennel and cooling system for 3 passengers who didn't wear helmets. Ranger climbed in first, finding his usual spot by the window. Echo jumped up next, always alert, eyes fixed on the horizon. Valor hopped in last, turned twice, and plopped down, tail wagging once before going still, ready for orders. Miranda approached the driver's side and handed Eli a thin folder. "First assignment," she said. "Recon sweep through the southern ravines. Unmanned zone. You'll be testing Echo unit protocols in live terrain." Eli accepted the folder with a nod, a faint spark of anticipation in his eyes. "We'll report by sunset." Miranda stepped back as the Jeep engine rumbled to life. Tires crunched over red gravel, the vehicle easing forward into open desert. High above the lot, a woman with a camera watched from a bluff, Danielle Morris, field reporter for the Sentinel Review. She had arrived expecting to cover a corruption scandal and ended up witnessing the birth of something entirely different. Through her lens, she captured the Jeep heading toward the horizon, dust rising behind it like smoke from an ember. Inside sat 3 dogs, their ears catching the wind, and a Marine who had learned to trust again. She wrote a single line in her notebook. "Red Mesa now has 4 guardians, 3 who cannot speak, and 1 who no longer needs to." And then, as the vehicle disappeared into the light, her narration, or perhaps the world's, carried softly over the image. Not all miracles arrive with thunder. Some walk quietly on 4 paws, in the spaces between heartbeats, in the loyalty of those who protect without promise of reward. In a world where betrayal hides behind polished smiles and justice often limps to the finish line, it's the silent protectors who remind us that gray still walks among us. A wounded Marine. 3 faithful shepherds. A desert that should have swallowed them, but didn't. Maybe you've never hung from a cliff, suspended between life and death. But maybe you felt abandoned. Forgotten. Ready to let go. And maybe, just maybe, something or someone came running back for you. A friend. A whisper. A dog. A savior. This story isn't just about soldiers or shepherds. It's about us, about how even in the most desolate places, God still sends guardians. Sometimes they wear uniforms. Sometimes they walk on 4 legs. Sometimes they're simply the strength inside us that refuses to die. If this story touched you, don't let it stop here. Share it. Someone out there may need this reminder tonight. Type Amen if you believe miracles still walk among us. And subscribe to join us for more true stories of courage, loyalty, and faith, where heroes don't always speak, but they always listen. Because not all angels have wings. Some have fur. And they never leave your side. Amen.